Hi everyone. Today, we move from the gambler mindset into a larger philosophical question. In the previous two episodes, we talked about why gamblers demand answers from fate. We also talked about why they turn randomness into fate and force causal meaning onto results that have no real causal connection. But hidden inside this is a deeper question. If a person's thoughts, desires, impulses, and choices are all determined by the past, does that person still have free will? A gambler says, I do not want to gamble either, but I cannot control it. This is just who I am. That sounds like an excuse, but if we take it seriously, it leads us into a very hard philosophical problem. Our personality has a background. Our desires have a history. Even the reaction in our brain at this moment has a biological basis. So when I say, this is my choice, is that I really a true starting point? Or is it only the temporary result of all the causes that came before? In this episode, we will talk about two philosophical positions. One is called hard determinism. The other is called soft determinism, often known as compatibilism. Both of them ask the same question. If everything has a cause, are we still responsible for ourselves? Let us begin with a very ordinary choice. This morning, someone chooses coffee instead of tea. He feels that this is his choice. I want coffee, so I drink coffee. But philosophy does not let that sentence go so easily. It keeps asking, why does he want coffee? Maybe he did not sleep well last night. Maybe his body is already used to caffeine. Maybe the taste of coffee gives him a sense of familiarity. Maybe at that moment, the weather, his mood, his memory, his taste, and his body all pushed him toward coffee together. If all these causes add up and produce this exact choice, then is this choice truly free? Or is it simply the result of a chain of causes? Once we place this question inside real life, it becomes heavier. Why does someone lose his temper? Why does someone escape? Why does someone become addicted? Why does someone know what he should not do and still do it? Of course, we can say, he chose it. But if we keep digging, we realize that this choice did not come from nowhere. It has a source. It has a background. It carries emotions, habits, wounds, and an environment behind it. If a person is pushed by all these things, step by step, toward a certain action, can we still blame him? We cannot answer too quickly. If the answer is too light, it becomes cheap motivation. As long as you want to change, you can change. But if the answer is too heavy, a person turns into a stone. I am determined anyway. There is nothing I can do. This is where philosophy becomes difficult. It cannot pretend that human beings are completely free, but it also cannot erase human responsibility too easily. Let us begin with the first position, hard determinism. This view is cold. It is not the ordinary superstitious idea of it was meant to be. It does not need gods to arrange anything. It does not need the universe to write a script. It simply says, everything that happens in the world has prior causes. Why does a ball roll? Because it was pushed. Why does a tree fall? Because wind, soil, weight, and structure have built up to a certain breaking point. Why does water flow downward? Because the physical conditions arrange its movement that way. Human choices work the same way. A person says something today, makes a decision, feels an impulse. It looks as if it suddenly happened. But hard determinism says, no, it is not sudden. It is the result produced by countless prior conditions. Your genes, family, education, social class, wounds, desires, physical state, nervous system, and current environment all take part in this decision. You think you are choosing, but in fact, you are being pushed by causality. The sharpest part of this view is this. If time were reversed to the exact same moment, and every condition were completely identical, if your body, memory, desire, fear, and brain activity had no difference at all, then you could not make another choice. You could only make the same choice, because the same causes would produce the same result. This is the coldness of hard determinism. It says, free will is only a feeling. Human beings think they are free because they cannot see all the causes. You cannot see how childhood shaped your reactions. You cannot see how the body affects your emotions. You cannot see how society arranges your desires. You also cannot see how much preparation the brain has already done before you become aware and say, I have decided. So you think you are the starting point. But hard determinism says, you are not the starting point. You are also a result. You are a temporary result formed by a long chain of causes. There is a classic image for this. A stone rolls down a mountain. If this stone had consciousness, it might think while falling, I am choosing to move downward. From the outside, we know that it has no choice. It is being carried along by gravity, angle, impact, and terrain. A hard determinist would say human beings are similar. The difference is that the causal chain inside a human being is far more complex. So complex that we cannot see it clearly ourselves. And we call the part we cannot see freedom. If hard determinism is right, then the scariest thing about it is not that it sounds absurd. It is that it sounds too reasonable, because we are not people who appear from nowhere. No one chooses their own birth. No one arranges their own childhood. No one can make a decision out of pure emptiness without body, emotion, environment, or past. From this angle, a human being really does look like someone being pushed forward by a causal chain. A gambler who returns to the table can say, "I did not suddenly become like this. I have pressure. I have desire. I have the memory of losing. I have a stimulation I cannot quit. I was pushed here step by step." That sentence is not completely wrong. In fact, part of it may be true. A person's downfall often has a background. A person's impulse often has a history. A person's weakness rarely falls from the sky. The problem is that when this explanation goes to the extreme, it slowly becomes an iron cage. At first, the person is asking, "Why did I become like this?" That is reflection. But slowly it becomes, "I can only be like this." That is the cage. Causes can help a person understand himself, but causes can also be used to seal himself shut. He says, "My upbringing was like this, so I have no choice. I have already lost this much, so I can only keep gambling." At this point, hard determinism is no longer only a philosophical position. It becomes a psychological posture, a posture of handing oneself over. A person no longer sees himself as a subject who can still respond. He begins to see himself as the remains of a chain of causes, as if the past has already lived the present for him, as if fate has already written his next step. This is the iron cage of fate. It does not always speak in the language of superstition. It can sound scientific, calm, reasonable, but in the end it can make a person slide from "I am affected by many things" into "I am not responsible at all." This step is small, but the consequence is large. Because once a person believes that he is only a result, it becomes very hard for him to seriously ask, "Then how can I respond now?" So philosophy develops another position, soft determinism. It is also called compatibilism. Compatible means determinism and free will do not necessarily cancel each other out. This sounds strange. If everything has a cause, how can a person still be free? The key of soft determinism is not to directly deny causality. It does not pretend that the past, the body, the environment, and desire are unimportant. It admits that human beings live inside causality. It admits that our choices are affected by background, personality, emotion, education, and social conditions. But it asks another question. What exactly do we mean by freedom? If freedom means that I must completely escape all causes, be completely unaffected by the body, completely unaffected by the past, and choose from emptiness like a god, then human beings are obviously not free, because no one lives like that. Everyone has a past, everyone has a body, everyone has habits, emotions, memories, and limits. If freedom must mean having no cause at all, then that is not human freedom, that is divine freedom. Soft determinism takes a more realistic approach. It says, freedom is not the absence of causes. Freedom is when a person's action can come from his own reason, desire, values, and reflection, and when that action is not forced by external coercion. For example, someone points a gun at a person and forces him to hand over his wallet. He gives the money. That action is not free, because it does not come from his real judgment. It is forced by external coercion. But if a person sees someone suffering, thinks about it, and chooses to help with his own money, then that action can count as free, even if his compassion was also shaped by his education, family, and personality. Why? Because the action expresses his inner judgment. It is not forced out by a gun. It is not simply dragged forward by impulse. It passes through his values. It passes through his understanding. It passes through his consent. This is how soft determinism redefines freedom. Freedom is not escaping causality. Freedom is being able, inside causality, to become the source of one's own action. This definition is not romantic, but it is more realistic, because real life is never without limits. Real life is when, inside those limits, something can still be reflected on, adjusted, and carried. Here we need to be careful. Soft determinism is not saying, as long as a desire appears inside me, it is freedom. A gambler wants to bet. That desire really does happen inside him. This does not mean his bet is free, because some desires are not expressions that have passed through reflection. They are only impulses, only habits, only addictive mechanisms pushing a person forward. So freedom cannot only ask, did I do this action? It must also ask, Did this action pass through my understanding and reflection? Am I able to say to this desire, I know you are pushing me, but I do not have to be completely identical with you? This sentence is important because people misunderstand freedom very easily. Some people think freedom means doing whatever they want, but often, doing whatever I want is actually the least free condition, because that want may already have been captured by desire, fear, habit, and addiction. A person says, I want to gamble. That is certainly his desire. But if he cannot pause and observe that desire, cannot understand where it comes from, and cannot say no to it, then is he really free? This is the space that soft determinism wants to protect. It is not saying that people can escape every force pushing them. It is saying that at least in some moments, a person may see what is pushing him. And this seeing is the smallest beginning of freedom. Then the question becomes, if people are affected by causes, why should they still be responsible? The answer from soft determinism is not, because you are completely unaffected. Its answer is, responsibility is not built on, I have never been influenced. Responsibility is built on whether a person can still understand his behavior, reflect on his motives, and respond to the consequences of his actions. That is why explanation is not the same as excuse. A person's childhood wound may explain why he becomes angry easily. That does not mean he can hurt others forever through anger. Causes help us understand where he comes from. Responsibility demands that he cannot hide forever behind where he came from. Likewise, when a person becomes addicted, escapes, or fails again and again, there may be complex causes behind it. These causes deserve to be seen, because if we do not see causes, we easily become cruel. We start thinking others are simply lazy, bad, or weak. But if we only see causes, there is another danger. A person may begin to hand all of his actions over to the past for explanation, as if once I can name the cause, I no longer need to carry the consequence. That is not right either. Mature philosophy does not simply choose one side. It does not talk only about responsibility while ignoring causes. And it does not talk only about causes while canceling responsibility. It must admit two things at the same time. Human beings are indeed shaped by many forces, but human beings also need to be responsible for how they respond to those forces. So responsibility is not the denial of fate's weight. Responsibility is asking, even when fate is heavy, can I respond in a clearer way? This sentence is not easy. It is even harsh, because it does not let a person escape too easily. Precisely because of that, it preserves human dignity. If a person has no responsibility at all, then he has no real position at all. He is only a thing being pushed. Responsibility is heavy because it admits you are not only a result, you are also someone who can respond to the result. So we can now understand fate differently. Fate is not completely non-existent. If we say life has no limits at all, that is childish. Everyone arrives in the world already standing in a certain position. Birth, family, body, era, talent, wounds, opportunities, probability, and everything that has already happened. These things are not distributed equally, and not everyone can change them easily. So fate does have a hard side. Hard determinism reminds us, do not naively think that human beings can be completely unaffected. But fate is not a complete script. It has not written every line, every movement, and every ending in advance. It is more like a set of boundaries. Boundaries define where you begin. They define what pulls on you. They define what is hard to cross. But boundaries do not necessarily complete your response for you. This is what soft determinism reminds us. Do not sink into the belief that a person is only the result of influence. A person cannot change how much he has already lost, but he can reflect on whether he wants to keep using "I have already lost too much" to force himself into another bet. A person cannot control which number the roulette wheel lands on, but he can begin to see why he keeps reading the wheel as fate. This does not mean change is easy, and it does not mean everyone has the same amount of freedom. Some people have narrower boundaries. Some people carry heavier situations. Some people have impulses that are harder to handle. So we should not use freedom to shame someone who is struggling. But we also should not use fate to cancel every possibility. A mature view avoids two extremes at the same time. When he wins, he thinks he can control everything. That is arrogance. When he loses, he thinks everything was already determined. That is surrender. A person cannot control all conditions, but he can learn to recognize, what is pushing me right now? Am I using the past as an excuse? Am I using fate as the reason for my next escape? This recognition itself is where freedom begins to appear, not the exaggerated kind of freedom. Not from now on, I am completely unaffected, but a small, difficult, and real freedom. I see that I am being pushed, and I am no longer completely identical with what is pushing me. So let us return to the question in the title. If everything is determined, am I still responsible? Soft determinism answers, yes. This responsibility does not ask you to pretend that fate has no weight. It asks you to keep a small ability to respond, even where fate is heavy. True freedom is not clearing away every cause. It is beginning to take responsibility for your response inside those causes. Fate may be like an iron cage, but human freedom is not pretending that the cage does not exist. It is discovering, inside the cage, for the first time with clarity, the door may not be fully open, but my hand can still stop reaching for the next bet.